Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be able to present to you the results of the Regional Climate Vulnerability Assessment. I will be presenting the results of the Regional Synthesis Report, and then I will be handing over to my colleagues who have written the national reports, and they will present the national results. I'm going to provide a brief overview of the situation in Southeast Europe, of natural hazards and of climate change, an overview of the development process of the reports and the methodology, and then a brief summary of some of the regional recommendations. Then my colleagues will go into more detail about the national recommendations for each country. Does this work? Okay, so a brief overview of the situation with regards to natural hazards. As I'm sure everyone here is aware, Southeast Europe is very vulnerable to natural hazards. Recently, countries in the region have been affected by droughts, heat waves, cold waves, as we all know from earlier in the year, floods and forest fires. The picture, I think, is of a recent flood in Montenegro. Earthquakes are also a significant risk, but since earthquakes are not a climate-related hazard, the regional report doesn't deal with them to any great extent. I know that some of the national reports go into details about earthquakes. The number of natural disasters in the region is actually rising. This graph shows the number of reported natural disasters in the region since 1963. In blue on the left, you see the number of natural disasters reported in Yugoslavia, and since 1991, in red on the right, are the number of disasters reported collectively in Croatia, Macedonia, Montenegro and Serbia. As you can see, there has been a significant rise in the number of natural disasters recently. Now, a brief overview of climate change. I'm not going to go into too much detail here because it will be covered in more detail later on. But the general trends expected over the coming century is that average temperatures were going to rise by as much as 2.3 degrees by mid-century and probably more by the end of the century. Overall, precipitation, rainfall will decrease, but it will fall in fewer and more intense events, and it will become more unpredictable. And sea levels are likely to rise in the Mediterranean. As a result of the increase in temperature, the region will experience more droughts, heat waves, forest fires, and extreme high temperatures. Because of the more intense rainfall, there will be increased risk of flash flooding, more intense storms due to the Adriatic Sea warming, and in general there will be less fresh water availability. This, combined with other trends, for example, ageing populations, which in common with the rest of Europe, all the countries represented here have ageing populations, increasing urbanizations. The combined effect with climate change will have a significant impact across many sectors. Adaptation is not optional. It needs to start now. Decisions taken now will determine ultimately how well the countries are able to cope in the future with climate change. So these reports, the national and regional CVA, were developed in the context of this project, the Southeast European Forum on Climate Change Adaptation. First of all, to provide an accessible overview of the vulnerabilities and potential adaptation measures for climate change in the region, and to provide a base for dialogue in the area of climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. The report is aimed at policymakers, opinion leaders, and civil society organisations. So please note, not scientists. So this is not a highly technical report. It's designed to be accessible to non-specialists. It's not fully comprehensive, but we hope that it will provide each report, the national reports and the regional report, will provide a useful starting point for discussions on how to address climate change in the region. Okay, the methodology of the reports. Each national report was compiled by local experts, mostly from desk studies. It's an overview of the existing literature in the region. There's also been significant input from other stakeholders, and in particular, members of the national CSO networks that exist in each country. In particular, the national CSO networks identified specific areas of concern within each country, which we'll look at later. The regional report is a synthesis of the national reports plus some additional research and discussion with the report or authors. So it doesn't include everything that's in the national reports, but it includes some of the most important recommendations. The reports cover natural hazards, impacts on various sectors, the government structures in place that currently deal with climate change and disaster risk reduction, and then give recommendations for how these can be approved so that climate change adaptation can happen more effectively. The focus is very much on adaptation, not mitigation. So most of the reports do not talk in depth about greenhouse gas emissions and decreasing them, which often comes up in discussions about climate change, but here the focus is very much on adaptation to current and future climate change. Each national CSO network identified various key areas of concern within their country. So not every country has all of these areas of concern, each picked 4 or 5. So we have agriculture and forestry, biodiversity, disaster risk reduction, energy, human health, and tourism, and water resources. Climate change has the potential to impact on these very severely, and each country picked the 4 or 5 it considered the most relevant to its interests, and my colleagues will talk about these in depth later on. Now, these are the key regional recommendations, first for policymakers, then for civil society in general. First of all, the development of comprehensive national adaptation plans for climate change is crucial. Without this, climate change adaptation measures, they will happen in bits and pieces, maybe one sector, maybe another. They might be very successful even, but they cannot be effective without a comprehensive national adaptation plan, without across the board for each country. As part of this, but as we've seen, the number of hazards and natural disasters is going to increase. We need to develop a comprehensive early warning system and emergency plan for natural hazards, in particular the ones which are going to increase with climate change, such as heat waves. I think each country represented here does have early warning systems in place, but they could be more effective and more coordinated. So to include this in the climate change action plan is a very good